Hello. Welcome back to the Untitled SEO podcast by Yeseo. I'm your host, Andrew Laws. I am the chief human at Yeseo, and we have an honoured guest today. So, honoured guest, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Chris Green. I'm a senior SEO consultant and I guess long-time messer abouter on the internet. I kind of made a career doing SEO, tinkering and playing with stuff, and feel lucky and bemused that I get to do this as my job.
A long-term muckabouterer. For the listeners, Chris and I have
Technical
known
term.
each other. Yeah, we've known each other, but we've known each other for some time. And I've always been really interested in the angle at which Chris approaches SEO. There's a lot of kind of assumed approaches to SEO in our world, in the world of SEO. And each time I've seen Chris, for example, a write up that you've given where you've given a talk somewhere, or just the titles of some of the things you've written and things you've been involved in, there's always something there which I think is quite interesting. You were one of the first people I remember really talking openly about keyword cannibalization. I mean, this is a long time ago, to be fair,
Yeah, it's a few years.
but it was a while ago. I think, yeah, it was always a thing, and I think, yeah, we know now. But when I spoke to you recently, just over the LinkedIn chat, you mentioned a phrase I've not heard before, and much like you, I've been in SEO a long time, and part of the joy of the whole thing for me is every day's a school day. So you mentioned the phrase Edge SEO. So can you
Oh, yes.
unravel that a little bit for me, please?
Yes. Well, one part of that's easy to unravel, and the other part's less easy to unravel. So I'll start with the easy part first. It is SEO as we know it in most recognizable senses. But the edge part is the bit that can lead you astray a little bit. It's effectively a new place for us to do SEO. So if you recommend changes to a developer, or you're in the position where you can implement changes yourself, you would do that on your website, most likely on the server that it's based on, in the code base that the site's written in, or within the CMS that you edit it. So that's kind of conventional. That takes place on what we'd call the origin server, so that the main point where your website lives. The edge is at a different level, kind of sits above the origin. If you're familiar with CDNs, sort of content delivery networks, a little bit like, say, Cloudflare or CloudFront or the various other providers, the edge is kind of facilitated at that level. So Edge SEO, put simply, is SEO that takes place there. It's making SEO changes or fixes above the server. Now, the term edge is a little bit odd in that you can ask any of the different CDN providers what they would consider edge to be. They all have slightly different takes on it. And many companies now that are CDNs conventionally now don't consider themselves just as a CDN. They might call themselves other things like cloud network solutions or other convoluted stuff. But the fundamentals of it are all the same. You rather than using the computing power of your server, you're using their computing power that's based somewhere else. And for SEO, the reason why that's kind of super exciting is for a number of reasons, really. You get to circumvent blockers or technical restraints that may stop you implementing changes. Or better yet, it enables you to do things that you couldn't do just on the origin server. You, in terms of optimizing for delivery, in terms of cleaning up redirects or generating sitemaps potentially, or various other, some SEO functions I would argue are better on the edge than they are on the origin. So it's kind of a wild new world of opportunity, whilst at the same time almost being painfully similar to conventional SEO. As I just said, it's just kind of just take it to a different battlefield, basically. I think hopefully that's helpful.
It absolutely is. So to kind of clarify it further, is
Sure.
this a technology that you can use with CMSs that are fairly ubiquitous at the moment, like WordPress or, well, it's WordPress really.
Yeah. So WordPress. So if your CMS sort of acts independent of any of the CDNs, then yes, in short. So WordPress, Drupal, things like that can interface well with it. So the most common or the easiest barrier to entry would be WordPress install with Cloudflare. So Cloudflare, their free tier will let you sort of help protect your website against malicious attacks. Also has lots of lovely one-click like optimization options that can help sort of speedy delivery of your website to the users. But more recently, Cloudflare have been adding things like redirect management, for example. So you could have your WordPress blog, but say you wanted to add some redirects in. Well, you don't have to add that at the WordPress level. You could add that at Cloudflare's level, for example. Or you can even sort of deploy files or other changes straight to Cloudflare, circumvent WordPress altogether. I think some reasons you might do that is if you're doing any SEO A/B testing, for example. So WordPress doesn't do that kind of thing very well out the box, whereas something like Cloudflare or another Edge provider could let you do that. So they work really well in tandem, depending on what you want to use it for.
So we're talking more about the more tech side of SEO. So it's not so much the words and the pictures; it's the delivery of those things. So I can see with my sort of limited technical understanding that if you are managing a redirect in Cloudflare, then it's going to be done by DNS, I'm guessing, or something that's a level above the actual files on a server being served.
Yes. Yeah, the real optimization for, say, redirects on the Edge is you never request that from the origin server. So user connects to, in this instance, Cloudflare, it sees the destination and it serves you the redirect right at that point on the Edge. So to most users, that'll almost be an imperceivable difference. But say you've got a 10-year-old installation of WordPress that's really unoptimized. Say you've got far too many redirects in there already, and just your application, WordPress just takes long to load. Depending on how it's built, you may have to wait for that to load to then process the redirect to then send it back. So, for example, you could, cut 2/3 off the time it takes just to serve a redirect. Or if you've got a chain of them, so again, say it's the site's existed for 10 years, you've redirected a page from A to B to C to D to E. You hit A in the sequence and you've got to wait for WordPress to redirect you between all of these different destinations before you finally get your working page. On the Edge, one of the things we've done is flattening redirects, so you don't have this chaining or this hopping between pages. You just hit the edge of the network. It goes, you want this page, we're going to serve you it, or serve you the redirected version. So it's on that side, that's as you said, like an entirely technical kind of reason for doing so. And the people that benefit from that are larger, older sites. So, if you're saving 900 milliseconds on a redirect and you have a 20-page WordPress website and you sell local services to people within a 50-mile radius, it's probably not something you'd get too excited about. If you're serving those redirects millions of times a day, that has a real kind of tangible impact on how Googlebot sees your website, but also on costs of just hosting and various other things. So that's one that I'd say is like an entirely technical, kind of fairly hardcore technical implementation. But it can sometimes be content as well. So you can use workers on Edge, or you can essentially code workers in JavaScript to do things like run a find and replace on the page. So whenever you see this link, change the anchor text to be something more optimal, for example. It would run it automatically. You'd already have built or written the code that would do that. And what it's doing for the users and for Google, they're seeing a different, more optimized link, but without you having to have made that change on the origin. So that could be dynamic, for example, that could change in various contexts, or it could just be possible where it might not have been. So still quite a technical thing, but it can impact your on-page elements, depending how you want to do it.
I can see that this is a technical thing, and in ye olden days of SEO, having a website that worked was sometimes enough to rank. I mean, I'm going back to last century, so I see this very much as a natural progression. It's kind of an obvious, not really a destination, because we're never going to reach like SEO nirvana, but it seems like quite an obvious step along the way, because we've seen so many times over the last 20 odd years that any optimizations that improve user experience and ultimately reduce tech debt, reduce the amount of oomph you have to put in how your website runs, generally are well aligned with
Yeah.
what Google likes to rank, essentially. So it makes a lot of sense. I mean, in a way, it worries me for the smaller companies who may not have the budget to invest in something like this, because one of my things has always been democratization of SEO knowledge, and I don't think I've heard you use that phrase, but just the way you share. I'm not putting words in your mouth here, Chris, but the way you share information, I think you're kind of along a similar lines. But then,
Absolutely. Yeah.
as you started to explain more of it, I thought, well, I'm not promoting them, but just moving your website somewhere like WP Engine or any of the what
Hmm.
I'd think was very good WordPress hosts is going to get you a large way towards this anyway. And the other reason I changed my mind about it worrying me for small businesses is that we also see quite regularly in SEO that if you make more of an effort than your competitors, you'll outrank them. That's a massive simplification, oversimplification, but generally I think I'm just celebrating awareness. I haven't really got a point of where I'm going here. I'm just I'm using
Yeah.
you for counselling now, Chris, and just sort of getting it all out.
No, I know what you mean. I think there's a truism there for sure in regards to, yeah, putting more effort in making your website better, more optimal, your experience better is definitely worth doing. I think the with regards to the edge or edge compute or this kind of distributed method of putting kind of content online, I mean, it's entirely possible you could go to Cloudflare today and build your website entirely on the edge. So you actually are a serverless website. Now, if you're a small business, a serverless website might be all you need. So it's just hosted or lives on the back of Cloudflare's distributed network, which is relatively inexpensive, relatively easy to use. I say relatively. I tinker with this stuff. I'm not an
Mm.
engineer, but I can make it work. But the stuff that of the different edge providers, so you've got this kind of spectrum. So on the one end, I'd say Cloudflare have positioned themselves very intentionally at this accessible end. So just moving your DNS to Cloudflare protects you from stuff, can optimize delivery, and for some businesses that's all you'll ever need to do, but you will get some of that sort of overall benefit of doing it. Now you can then go into the more complex end of things. You can start writing your own workers, doing some more complex stuff if you so wish, and again it's reasonably accessible from like a budgetary point of view. Whenever you're using workers or any of this computed edge stuff, it tends to then cost. So if you are a small business that gets a large amount of traffic, for example, you may find some sort of cost prohibitive factors there. But if we kind of then take a step away from Cloudflare to like the extreme end of the spectrum, and we look at Akamai or Fastly, who kind of much more the enterprise end, um, the problems that they're solving, the network infrastructure that they're putting in place, they're slowly transforming like the tech stacks of major companies, major e-commerce platforms. And the way that people are thinking slowly is actually this doesn't need to sit on our servers anymore. This could go and live somewhere else, and it would be cheaper and quicker. And if we need to upgrade it, we don't need to upgrade our setup, we're upgrading someone else's. So I think the opportunities and what people have to gain from it is, yeah, very, very different depending on where you sit in the overall kind of scale of things. I'd say um, the most likely implementation of Edge on smaller businesses, or if you're thinking you're an SME or a small business, is where I need to make some changes and I just cannot do it on my platform. I have to do it somewhere else. The Edge is another option. Now, I'm not saying that's the best option. That sounds like a hack or a hot fix, but that is a solution. So I think, think back to my days primarily in agency. I'd make recommendations to small businesses. Their developers couldn't or wouldn't make the required changes. So for me, something like an Edge platform where I could come in and just change some title tags or some links in some menus or something like that is a very attractive prospect. So you know, I would say there's definitely a lot of health warnings around that, and I'd say in like an enterprise situation, hot fixing stuff on the edge to circumvent the devs or engineers that are running like the main code base is actually quite an unpopular and probably not great thing to do. Yeah, it alienates people slightly. So how you utilize it and how you get the best benefit out of it does depend. I would say for me, if I could characterize a lot of my career, it's kind of like, well, identifying the problem is actually pretty simple. I'd say 95% of cases, like it's clear what the problem is. It's that path to implementation is often really difficult.
Yeah.
And whenever I'm sort of teaching or workshopping with anyone, like the key thing I drum into people is this stuff doesn't do anything until it's live. Like the content that we've written, the keyword research, the technical audits, like until this stuff is reflected in the code that Google is crawling, it means very little. And whether the blocker is my fault or somebody else's, if I'm the one giving the recommendations, it still I can't get the result I want until I can get over this like implementation gap. So the initial excitement around Edge is this implementation gap gets smaller, or I have a new weapon in the arsenal. And sometimes actually, if you just go to a team and say, well, look, we can do this using your Akamai service, and we can write a worker. They usually don't want to do that, but very often just being told there's another workaround or it is possible can sometimes spur people on to making the change the right way. So it's another tool. I don't think it's not mainstream at the moment, and I think it will take years to become so. I think until websites become serverless as a more common occurrence, this is more fringe cases, web optimization, other sort of elements. I don't think it'll ever be the dominant method. But I don't see that as being a problem either, because as you sort of said, it is quite a niche application in so many ways.
It is at the moment, but a lot of technology like this trickles down. Sometimes it takes a very long time, but I can remember seeing the first Drupal website and just thinking, well, this is it, we're here now. And then worked on one and lost, turned grey and lost some years off my life. And then that trick, there's probably people screaming if they listen to this, but the more complex CMSs like Drupal then trickled down to being WordPress, which is very easy to use. And that then trickled down to being, I don't know, Squarespace or something. And these things become more accessible and more kind of attainable without having to have that great tech understanding. I mean, I've been experimenting over the last couple of years with headless CMSs like I can't say it, Stastamic, and some of the other ones that can just live in an Amazon S3 bucket, or they don't need any sort of guts, as it were. So, which I is that sort of thing you would think of as serverless, because it's sitting in it's a static files sat in an S3 bucket being served by CloudFront on AWS. So it's
Mm-hmm.
is that am I sort of thinking of the right way? You can say no, you're an idiot. I wouldn't be offended. Okay, I've got a text message here from Chris saying his connection is struggling a bit.
Hello.
His conversation is. Oh, that's all right. Are you back?
Yeah, I caught bits of that.
Sorry, I was just sort of trying to think it through into sort of perhaps brands or names that people have heard of. So I was thinking, I was mucking around with Jekyll and Stastamic, which are headless CMSs where you bung the files in an Amazon S3 bucket on AWS and then serve it using CloudFront and Route 53. I'm not sure that's quite what you're talking about, but I'm sort of trying to bring it into a way that I understand.
Yeah, it is broadly. I think the ethos is there. I think it's the networks that everything's distributed on that's the kind of the key, and it's that difference of your origin, whether it's a dusty server cabinet in one place or whether you got it from a data center, or it's that difference of piggybacking on someone else's architecture, I guess, to kind of help benefit from that. So yeah, absolutely. I think just coming back to what you're saying around, Drupal trickled down into WordPress, that trickled down into other things. So one of the things that I'm hugely excited about in general, and the link to Edge is there. I'll come back to it in a second, but is things like Wix or other services actually becoming better. And you said right at the start, like the democratization of this kind of knowledge, democratization of the web. As much as I love WordPress, I've fallen out of love with it over the last couple of years, because for the vast majority of people that I've worked with, it's still too complicated. It's still too easy to make a bad website. Don't get me wrong, WordPress has done a huge amount, and plugins like Yoast and others have, that are shaping the web, but it's still a little too exclusive, or the barrier to entry is still too high for it to impact the majority of people, in my experience.
It's sort of pulling both ends of the spectrum, because it's too complex
Mm,
and has too much for a lot of people, but it's also suffering from trying to be all things to all people. I sometimes explain to people that a Windows computer might get slow because it's trying to be everything to everyone. It's trying to be everyone's best mate. A Mac might not be quite so much, because it just does a core set of things very well. I think WordPress is interesting because it's a victim of its own success and its own simplicity in a really confusing way. Oh, see, at this point, I can't tell if Chris is deep in thought or whether his internet has crapped out. Unfortunately, his internet has crapped out. So hopefully he's going to come back. But we are recording this in the Easter holiday here in the UK. And what happens with UK broadband is, as soon as the kids leave school and fire up Minecraft or anything else they're playing, all the bandwidth disappears. I think I'm going to give Chris a few minutes to come back. And if he doesn't come back, I think, sadly, we might have to wrap this one up. I think it's been a really interesting episode. And what I'll do is I will get Chris actually in the room with me here at the Yeseo headquarters. And we'll kind of carry on from there, because I think there's a lot more to this discussion to be had. It's really interesting, as somebody in the SEO industry, to talk to people like Chris, who are really looking at the bleeding edge, and so beyond the cutting edge. And I genuinely thought that's where the name Edge might come from the bleeding edge. Right. Unfortunately, I think I'm going to call that, and I'm going to wrap up this episode. So thanks for listening. This is a really interesting discussion that will continue, and I might call this one part 1. Okay, brilliant. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe, like it, add stars to it, tell your friends, ring your mum about it, all the good stuff. You've been listening to the Untitled SEO podcast by Yeseo, and I'm your host, Andrew Laws, and I will smell you later. Bye.